So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to An Appreciation of Friends. This panel discussion is the first of several events that are planned this year to celebrate Jurist's 25th anniversary. And I'm Bernard Hibbitts, and I'm your host for this event this afternoon. It is my honor to be the publisher and editor-in-chief of Jurist. Established in 1996 at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law as a personal project, Jurist is now a 501c3 nonprofit corporation led by a professional staff and powered by some 80 students from 29 law schools on 5 continents who collaborate in real time to provide accessible, high-quality legal news and commentary to a worldwide audience. I've invited our panelists to join us today because most of them have been with us as commentators and contributors for most of our 25-year history. One of those panelists is new, but all of our panelists are here because they have made a fundamental contribution to Jurist in various ways during their time with us, even if limited. And I would like to begin our event this afternoon by asking each one of our invited panelists to introduce themselves, and you can indicate your current position or your previous position, or perhaps if you like your most notable position. So David Crane, since I see you on the screen here in a prominent position, why don't you go first?
Well, thank you, Bernard, and good afternoon, good evening, perhaps good morning to the audience. It's a pleasure to be on this panel, but also to honor the 25th anniversary of really an amazing journalistic endeavor. So my compliments to all who have made this happen. I'm David Crane. I'm the founding chief prosecutor of the International War Crimes Tribunal in West Africa, called the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Right now, I am the founder and also the director of the Global Accountability Network, building cases against various individuals in Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the program.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, David. And David was with us in 2007 when we celebrated our 10th anniversary. So it is my pleasure to have him with us again. Marjorie, why don't you go?
Thank you, and I'm honored to be part of this panel and also honored to have been writing with Jurist for the last 25 years. I am Professor Emerita at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, past president of the National Lawyers Guild, and also retired criminal defense attorney. And I currently write books and articles, do media commentary, and do presentations about global human rights and global wrongs.
Thank you, Marjorie. Appreciate that. Ben Davis, you're next. Can you go, Ben?
Hello, everybody. My name's Ben Davis. I am the retired professor of law as of January 31st, 2021. I can't say emeritus until they decide by the Board of Trustees. And after teaching for about 20 years, before that, I taught at University of Toledo College of Law, and then before that at what's now Texas A&M. And then before that, I worked for about 14 years at the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris on international arbitration and basically business stuff. And I've been writing for a long time with Jurist, and I have loved this opportunity and the inventiveness of the people who work at Jurist to make things happen. And particularly, there's one piece that I think of I'll mention later.
I'm looking forward to that in that case, Ben. Thank you very much. That's terrific. Kevin, why don't you go?
Thank you so much, Bernard. It's a pleasure and honor to be with each of you today and for our listening audience as well. I'm Kevin Govern, currently serving as a professor of law at Ave Maria School of Law. Prior to coming to Ave Maria School of Law, I served 20 years on active duty the United States Army as a judge advocate, including under David Crane, my mentor and friend. During that time, I deployed to a variety of peacetime and wartime operations, thus giving me a practical perspective on national security in particular. Since my retirement from the military, but coming into academia, I've become a founding board member of the Center for Ethics and Rule of Law at the University of Pennsylvania School of Law. And I've also had the privilege and pleasure of teaching at the United States Military Academy at West Point, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, California University of Pennsylvania, and Ave Maria University. It's a distinct pleasure to join you after being a contributor since 2007, but a learner from Jurist during its entire tenure. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was great. And now we go from some old timers to a newcomer. Elliot, you're on.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elliot Winter. I'm a lecturer in international law at Newcastle University in sunny UK. And in 2019, I was over in Pitt for just about 3 months as a visiting professor teaching the law of armed conflict. So yes, I'm very much the newbie on the panel here. So I'll just say happy 25th anniversary to Jurist, and yeah, hopefully another happy 25 years will follow.
So we will look forward to that, Elliot. I'll say that much at this point. So let's get the panel going, and I'd like you all to think about a question here, and thinking about your own experience on Jurist and your own expertise. I'd like if you could share with our audience, the types of things that you've been talking about on Jurist over the years. I mean, obviously a lot has happened over time, right? And we can talk about that some more in a couple of minutes, but tell everybody about the types of things you've been writing about, the types of issues that you've been grappling with for a good part of this period. And maybe Marjorie, I'll go to you to get us started on this one. And I think you're muted.
Sorry.
That's
I
okay.
was looking back at the articles I've published on Jurist, dozens of them. I don't think I even accessed all of them, and tried to kind of glean some patterns. I have written critically of the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and about to start on the Biden administration, specifically on issues of war and peace, illegal war making, surveillance, civil liberties, some administrations more than others, torture, violation of international law, civil liberties, human rights, racism, reparations, racial profiling, Israel-Palestine, Cuba, drones, white supremacy, Trump's attempted electoral coup, the illegal wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, and then Obama's droning in 7 different countries, Trump's illegal bombings, and now Biden, no more than a month in office, was invading and attacking, actually I should say attacking Syria and Iraq in violation of the UN Charter. And the list goes on and on and on. I have some titles of some articles. I don't know if you want to hear them, but those are the general areas that I've written about. So human rights, violation of international law by successive U.S. administrations, civil rights, civil liberties, the Supreme Court, quite a bit about the Supreme Court, Guantanamo, and on and on.
It's really an incredible range, and you in particular have just contributed so much over the years, and I appreciate all of that. There has been a lot going on, Marjorie, I think, and maybe we can explore that a little bit more with some of our other panelists. But I want some of them to also have a chance to talk about what they've been talking about on Jurist. So Ben, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you've been focusing on over the years?
Okay, well, I'd like to say that it isn't me who's focusing on it. It's this doggone muse. I have this muse inside of me who every once in a while just says, you have to write something. So, and it won't leave me alone until I've finished it. And waiting for it to be in a law review is terribly frustrating. And so I would send it off to you all at Jurist. And what was wonderful is I think as short as 24 hours, it was up, and my muse was now calmed and would allow me to live the rest of my life. So this particular topics that got me going, or got my muse going, was all of the stuff with regards to torture. The particular military commission acts with the hermetically sealing people into a particular law, all the laws but one. I remember that. A lot of stuff on torture, analyzing the torture memos. I guess one of the proudest moments of my life was reading Yu's torture memo, and going through and actually looking at the regulatory standards he looked at and convincing myself that guess what? He made it up. And as compared to the standards he invoked. And even though they got off inside the Justice Department, I was happy to see that they were forced to confront the issue that the standards that he cited to did not support the standard that he proposed to present in the particular report. Beyond that, it's just kind of like where things go. Yes, there's been some things on racism, particularly recently. My muse was very strong with regards to Breonna Taylor. And one of the things, this is the one I wanted to tell you all about, was there was one that I called For What It's Worth. And I was so happy that each of the little chapter headings was a hyperlink that took you to the old Buffalo Springfield song. And that was brilliant. I mean, I said, that is just so amazing how they, the person there who came up with that one. Beyond that, recently I've been writing about the whole Capitol thing that happened, and I should mention this. I've been kind of on a run this entire year, railing about the way that COVID's being addressed by the government, particularly my concerns about limitations of liability protections for businesses, etc.
A lot there, Ben, and I love the For What It's Worth piece. That was literally one of our greatest hits. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. David, tell us about what you've been writing about over time.
Well, I began, I think actually, Bernard, you reached out to me when I just started at Syracuse University, having come and retired from the United Nations, and was starting my academic career at Syracuse University College of Law, and introduced yourself and invited me to be a contributing editor and provide whatever thoughts and perspectives that I felt like writing about. And so since 2006, I actually went back, much to my surprise. I've written since that time over 56 pieces for Jurist alone. And I'm very proud of that, and flipped through some of them. But again, like Marjorie, it's a target-rich environment. I've had no trouble trying to figure out what to write about and supporting jurists, but also just writing about my frustrations, angers, and concerns as the rule of law has gone down these very, very scary rapids since 2006. It's been an amazing journey, but my focus has been on concerns related to national security law, international humanitarian law, international criminal law, and of course, being a student of history, I've been very, very concerned and has watched the United States slowly but surely devolve over the past 4 years into a situation that was very much like Germany in 1931 and 1932, where a liberal democracy slid into the darkness. And so I've written extensively about that over the past 4 years, and have used Jurist, among other newspapers, to express my concerns about this development as well.
All right. Thank you, David. And we want to come back to that in a couple of minutes, but thank you for reminding us of the range of things that you've covered there. Kevin, I think this sort of connects well to you too. What have you been talking about over your time with Jurist in various capacities?
Well, thank you very much. I'm humbled by David's 56 contributions. I've only had 22 since I started in 2007. And to riff off of what Ben had said, you have been my muse. I believe you were the person that reached out to me first, Bernard, while I was still teaching at West Point, to talk about some rethinking of rule of law efforts in Iraq, when that was a contemporary issue then, and it is now. I think back to the quote from Ecclesiastes, also known as Kohelet in the Hebrew Bible, that there's nothing new under the sun. Yet there are many different takes that we have on it over the years. And One of the things that has been consistent has been your drive and your determination to be able to get cutting edge items quickly and with great quality to your viewing public, to your reading public. And a special shout out, a special kudos to the 11 different student editors that I've worked with over the years, some of whom have put up with me 6 times. Jonathan Cohen put up with me 6 times. Jeremiah Lee, 3, Caleb Pittman, 3, Kenneth Hall twice, Patrick Sherry twice. Most recently, I worked with Kushali Mahajan at the Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law in India, and I have an ongoing project with her. And that's really one of the great satisfactions is the outreach that takes place based upon jurist articles, the people that connect with us and that we connect to, thanks to your outstanding efforts. So the things that I've talked about in national security law, international law, particularly international humanitarian law, the so-called law of armed conflict, and professional ethics have been varied, but the consistent factor has been your contributions and the rich talent pool that you have attracted in order to be able to have great commentaries. It's been a profound honor for me to contribute over these years.
I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you very much. I especially appreciate your shout outs to the students. You have done so much of this work over the years, especially on the commentary side. I was happy to get it going, but I've left it in very capable hands. And in fact, a number of those commentary editors I know are with us this afternoon. So that's terrific to hear you say that. And so thank you. Elliot, I think you're last, definitely not least in substantive ways, but I know that you're the newest contributor. Just tell us a little bit about what you've been submitting to us.
Well, I'd follow on from Kevin there and thank you and also Tim Zubizarreta, who I think's here somewhere, for encouraging me to submit pieces to Jurist in the first place, because it's not something, before I published with Jurist, it's not something I'd ever done before. The only other publications I've had have been in academic journals in the UK or in Europe. So it was a new experience for me to publish something online with breakneck speed and high quality. So it's actually been really useful. It's opened a door to something I hadn't really thought about doing before that. Looking over the huge list of 3 pieces that I've submitted to Jurist, there's a trend in there, I suppose. I mean, 2 of them are on my area, which is all of armed conflict. And it just so happens that 2 of them deal with the killing of Iranian military officials. So the first was Qasem Soleimani, and then the second was Fakhrizadeh, who was the nuclear scientist, who was also targeted. So it wasn't that I was intending to specifically write on these people, but again, as others have mentioned, because you can catch the news cycle with Jurist, because there's such a quick turnaround, you can actually see things that are relevant to your research. You can draw on your research, things that you've maybe published in the past or things you've taught on, but actually turn it around really quickly and apply it to current events. So that's been incredibly helpful for me. And actually, in particular, the Fakhrizadeh piece, I had just written an article, well, in the summer, I think it was, of 2020, and it was a big piece that went to the ICLQ. And it concerned autonomous weapons and how these machines that can conduct war go about targeting, basically. And then I think I'd written it over the summer of 2020, and it was published in October 2020. And then in December of 2020, I think I've got my year right, Fakhrizadeh was killed. And a lot of the facts were disputed, but the Iranians said that it was the Israelis that had done it, and they had used facial recognition technology on a vehicle-mounted machine gun to do the targeting for them. So it linked directly into the piece that I had written just a couple of months before. So I was able to take that quite there's a lot of practical examples in there, or at least I tried to talk about practical examples and real life technologies, but then to have a few weeks later, really, to have this real life example of potentially an autonomous weapon, or again, we don't really know, but something that could have been an autonomous weapon targeting such a high profile figure, and to be able to write about that so promptly after was really useful. So, I mean, unsurprisingly, those pieces concerned the law of armed conflict. The outrider was the piece on Brexit, and I don't want to I could bore everyone here for a long time talking about Brexit, but I won't. But what I did do was I couldn't resist it, because the Brexit deal was finally published on Christmas Eve 2020. And I thought, no, I'm not going to read it. And then I thought, no, I'm not going to read it. And then I thought, okay, I'll read it, but I'll just read a bit of it. And I picked the bit that I thought would be most interesting to me, which was the dispute settlement provisions. So I looked at them, and basically the idea was that there was going to be, rather than have the ECJ oversee things, or, for example, the UK Supreme Court or any other international court, there were going to be ad hoc panels that would settle disputes. Haven't seen any of those yet, incidentally, but I think there are quite a few disputes. And I was trying to figure out, okay, who would this benefit, this idea of having ad hoc panels rather than a proper a standing court? And I thought, well, one of the downsides of not having a standing court is that you're not going to get any body of jurisprudence emerge from this UK EU trade deal, which from a lawyer's point of view is a bit sad. So you won't have this body of jurisprudence. And then I thought, well, what does that mean? And it probably means in practice that the arbitrators will be looking around to what other courts are actually saying. And the appellate body at the WTO is the obvious example. And then I was trying to figure out, will that benefit one side or the other? And I thought, well, actually, that will probably benefit the EU, because the EU is one of the main actors when it comes to WTO cases, alongside the United States and probably China. It's one of the big players at the WTO. So it's getting the chance to have its lawyers putting forward its opinions a lot of the time. And of course, the UK is not part of that anymore, so the UK won't have any impact on those going forward. It will have had an impact, I suppose, on the cases that have already happened. But for new cases, it's going to be an EU thing, not the UK. And the UK is going to be a smaller actor on the WTO level. So I thought the jurisprudence side will probably favour the EU. Having said that, the arbitral panels are going to have 3 members. You'll have an EU member, a UK member, and then an independent member could be someone from the US, potentially. I think they're also talking about Brazil, maybe India. And I thought that side of things might favour the UK, because the UK is always going to have a panelist there, whereas the EU state that's most affected might not. So you might have an Italian panelist present, but actually the issue might affect Norway more. And I think there's going to be a bit of wrangling in the future with these panels as to who's actually selected and who goes on to the panel from the EU side, because you've got 27 states there, and various member states might have an interest in having a panelist. So that was the outlier piece. The EU-UK trade deal just couldn't resist it. And Jurist allowed me to write a brief piece on it, which was really helpful.
Well, I'm glad you couldn't resist, Elliot, and hopefully there'll be lots of other instances that you won't be able to resist going over, but it's great to have you with us here, because you literally are the voice of the rest of the world here. And as we go global on Jurist, more and more of our commentators, I'm sure, are going to come from outside the United States. I want to go back to a topic that David sort of raised incidentally in speaking to us a couple of minutes ago, because you're all in a unique position. You know, you've been sort of monitoring the national and international legal situation with us for a very long time. And I just wonder, you know, listening to all of you and listening to the range of topics and concerns that you have, whether you believe, as some believe, that as they say, the arc of history bends towards justice, or do you believe, perhaps as David suggested, that it is going in some other direction? And David, I do want to go back and pick things up with you on this, because you started so provocatively. So why don't we go back to the theme that you picked up? I mean, do you really see a slide? Are you profoundly concerned about the direction things are going in, both internationally and nationally? And I think you might be muted, David.
Excuse me. I don't want to give everybody the impression that I'm all doom and gloom here and that we're sliding into an abyss. I was just trying to, as someone who has over the past 20 years really focused on prosecuting tyrants, dictators, and thugs, and putting them in jail, to include the first sitting president of a republic, Charles Taylor, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And so I've studied all of the tyrants over the past 100 years, the bloody 20th century. And of course, I've really focused on all of these areas to include the rise of Adolf Hitler and how he came to power and what methods did he use to take over power. And I was struck by really, it was almost like the former president was taking something right out of a playbook. It's a very interesting way about dictators, starting all the way going back to King Leopold II of Belgium, going all the way forward to Charles Taylor. There are some interesting similarities to all of these individuals who destroyed, in my research, over 130 million human beings in the 20th century. And so I had the opportunity to, and I want to underscore, when things were really moving quickly in the Twitter world, I was able to get my concerns out to the world via jurist very, very quickly. So again, I'm very optimistic, to be honest with you. On that first week in November, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and it wasn't a monkey with a flashlight anymore. And so I think I have a lot of faith in this country. I have defended this country for many, many years. I've been in harm's way. But the bottom line is that I grew up in the 1960s as a teenager with Vietnam, civil rights, Watergate, all of those issues. And this country has always come back. And I think this country will continue to move forward. It's not perfect, but certainly I don't want to give anybody an impression in the listening audience that I think we're going down a wrong turn. What I'm saying is that we have to be very mindful of history and how striking the past president was using techniques used by dictators and thugs over the past 100 years, the very same tools to maintain power. So yeah, I was concerned as hell for a while, but again, the American people stepped forward as they always do, and democracy prevailed. So that's where I was coming from.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Ben, what's your sense of how we've been doing in the past 25 years or so and how we're doing at the moment?
Well, maybe start with the moment. Many people I talk with do feel that we've been living a repressive moment, if I can call it that, certainly with the last administration, with sort of doing something, doubling down on it, tripling down on it, quadrupling down on it, and reducing the space for human rights, et cetera, inside the United States. I've been convinced by a very good friend of mine, who's a professor at University of Detroit Mercy, named Jelani Jefferson Exum, that it's not a repressive moment, but it's just it's one more moment in a long repressive space inside the United States. And so when you talk about the arc of history bending towards justice, it is that long twilight struggle for justice that's been going on for, I don't know, from what I've read, at least from the antebellum period to now. I say that because I actually was reading a book by a guy named Charles Sellers on the Jacksonian period. And one of the things that really struck me was that when the shift from, this is like 1830s or so, was when you had the shift from essentially agrarian communities to the market at that time, people complained about how the avarice of all these new players and how they only focused on money, and how the lawyers and the rich people wanted us all to defer to them, and we were all inferiors to them. And I said, that sounds like the billionaires and all that today. You know, I mean, nothing new under the sun. Truly struck me as I read that. And you know, right now we see with what happened with this election that obviously democracy did prevail in the sense that the votes were counted and all that. But you can also see post Shelby that there's an intense effort in many states to disenfranchise people again. And that's been something that's gone on for so many decades in this country, of this kind of back and forth There's a wonderful speech made in 1901 by the last Black congressman from the South in Reconstruction, George White, where he talks about all the manipulations that were done to get him out of office. And, you know, when you look at it, you go, nah, nothing new under the sun. However, I remain optimistic, mainly because I've read people like Martin Luther King, who again talked about the arc of history bending towards justice. And I commend to everybody his 1967 speech called The Three Evils, where he talked about the three evils of racism, war, and poverty. And I think that the focus, I think, in this particular COVID package that just came out, which seems to be focused towards more poor and low income people, at least from what I hear, is a bit of addressing that poverty issue, addressing that desperation. On the international plane, you know, I do worry about the U.S. stepping back from international legal obligations. Obviously, the Biden administration stepping up for the Paris Climate Accord, but I'm kind of more worried about, to a certain extent, the continuing path of the Supreme Court to try to interpret treaties, customary international law, but mainly treaties in a way that tends to pull the U.S. out of a strict obligation. If you look at the Roberts Court over time, that's one of the things that strikes me in terms of trying to give more sort of autonomy to the United States as opposed to what were pretty clear obligations. What gives me a little hope too, if I'll say this too, is, believe it or not, I am kind of a Madisonian, and I like the double protection of the rights of the people through our federalism, because I think one of the things that helped to check some of the excesses of the federal government were states bringing cases, particularly I think of the Muslim ban and the impact it had on certain states like Washington and Hawaii that helped to slow those kinds of things down. So in that sense, you know, there are countervailing forces to some extent inside the United States. As to the rest of the world, I worry about climate change. I worry about poverty. I want to make sure that these COVID vaccines get out to wherever they're needed in the world, in addition to here, and that we have to discuss things like basically the autocratic democracy approach that we see in some places, like Viktor Orban in Hungary, which is a place very close to my heart. Some people are saying that that's the same in India. Obviously, you have the autocratic approach that we see in China, and you know, and the effect that has on basic human rights of people abroad as well as here. Finally, in the United States, you know, we kind of give the private sector a lot of freedom, but you know, I think with freedom comes responsibility. And there's one question about to what extent that workers are really being treated fairly. I've been appalled at the combination of limiting liability protections for COVID risks, so that essentially companies are protected but not people, and people are caught between the rock and the hard place of, do I work or do I and risk getting COVID, or do I stay home and not have enough money because the unemployment, et cetera, is not going to make it happen? And there's even statutes that have been passed in 16 states that have limited COVID-19 liability. And I think that's just an example of a callousness that is in the air that we have to fight all the time.
Thank you, Ben. Kevin, you want to take a shot at this?
Yes, please. We famously think about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's quote about the arc of the moral universe being long, and thinking that that is a necessary matter of inevitable outcome. And this is taking nothing away from the great minister and leader of civil rights, but his inspiration came from Theodore Parker, who was an abolitionist minister, who said in his quote, "I don't pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and what I see, I'm sure it bends towards justice." So there's a hopefulness in the inspiration, and there's a more emphatic effort in our inspiration and our exhortation from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I fall someplace in between. I look to be able to be inspired not only by my faith, but also, of course, by reason. I do see that there is a continuing trend to have resistance against autocracy, and that defenders of human rights and democracy and the rule of law are gaining strength in a variety of places in a variety of ways. And each of us in ways large and small have contributed to chronicling that, and I think also to some extent to promoting it and raising the consciousness of the readers that these are important issues. So even though I can't lay claim to having necessarily bent the arc of the moral universe, I'd like to be able to believe, at least in my active duty time, that I helped advance rule of law, and at present as a teacher and as a writer, as a scholar, that I help illuminate same. So I'm not sure that squarely answered your question, but I remain hopeful, but don't believe that these matters are inevitable. It takes a great deal of work, and Jurist goes a long way towards showcasing that requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Marjorie, your turn. Are we bending towards justice, or is your very comprehensive efforts documenting the opposite these days?
Well, if we are bending toward justice, it's not because it's coming down from on high, it's because the people have taken it upon themselves to demand justice. And I think the mass uprisings we saw in the wake of the public lynching, torture, and murder of George Floyd was an illustration of that. And of course, his killer, Chauvin, is going on trial now. If he is acquitted, I think we're going to see even more widespread mass protests. Now, in terms of Donald Trump, he didn't really create this racist atmosphere that has pervaded this society. He unleashed the dogs that have always been there. He made it okay to come out of the woodwork, the white supremacists. And so he started way back with the Central Park Five, with the birther movement, and then launched his campaign talking about rapists and criminals from Mexico, and that pervaded his presidency, and it really resonated with white supremacists who came out of the woodwork, as we saw. I would like to be hopeful. I still hear talk about American exceptionalism and America has to be the leader. And I think this rhetoric, which we saw even during the Obama administration, we're seeing it now in the Biden administration, of course, in the Republican administrations, is very dangerous because it leads the US government to invade and attack and torture people, generally people of color, in other countries illegally and also dangerously. And so another thing that I think we need to keep in mind, people say democracy prevailed. Biden eked out a win. It was much too close. I personally feel that if it wasn't for the pandemic, which Trump criminally mishandled, I think I hold him personally responsible for tens of thousands of deaths and infections, I think that he may well have won. And I'm not talking about it having been stolen from him in the false narrative that he created. The voter suppression efforts, as Ben pointed out, have only multiplied. They are proliferating all over this country. And I think perhaps one of the most significant, if not the most significant, legacies of the Trump administration are the 200 plus judges that he appointed, federal judges with lifetime appointments. And I'm not just talking about the 3 on the Supreme Court. I'm also talking about circuit court judges, district court judges, and most of the law is made at the circuit court level. It doesn't get to the Supreme Court. And so we are facing decades of Trump judges who promised to eviscerate human rights, civil liberties, reproductive rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, immigrants' rights, workers' rights, etc. And to the extent that we do achieve justice or that things start to turn in a more progressive direction, it's only going to be due to the power of the people and people pushing the legislature, the executive, the courts, the three branches of government with mass movements. So I would like to say that I am optimistic. I am certainly glad that Trump did not win a second term. Joe Biden has so far a mixed record to the extent that he does progressive things beyond those things that the obvious things. It is going to be because he has been pushed by the people.
Thank you, Marjorie. That was great. I do believe, actually, we have been, before I go to you, Elliot, for a bit of a look forward, I think we've been joined by another one of our panelists, Ali Khan. Do I see you here? I believe I do. Yes, you're muted. Can you come on for a second? Can you unmute? Here we go. We're working on this. We're hoping. We're hoping.
I think I'm good.
You're good. You are unmuted. Yes, welcome, welcome, welcome. So I want everybody to meet you because you have also been one of our very frequent contributors and most eloquent contributors over the years. Ali, please introduce yourself briefly and maybe say a couple of words to everybody about the type of things that you've been writing about over the years for Jurist.
Well, my name is Ali Khan, and I've been teaching at Washburn University School of Law since 1983. And a couple of years ago, I retired. And now I am totally devoting myself to writing. And I really love it. I think I should have done it maybe 15 years ago. So that's what I'm doing, writing over world affairs. And I'm also doing book reviews. I love to do poetry book reviews. I really love that. And of course, writing for Jurist is always a pleasure.
So what's your take, Ali, on the question that we're sort of going around with at the moment? Do you think that the last 25 years have been good, positive? Are you optimistic with the direction in which we're going? Or do you expect that you too might be talking in future about a variety of very contentious and problematic issues?
Bernard, I'm not sure. I am not a futurist. And I believe that the future is totally unpredictable. I think nobody could have predicted that the United States democracy would face such a downtrend. And the kind of things that have happened in the last 4 or 5 years under President Trump, I could have never imagined that the US would take such a sharp turn toward conservatism and wipe out some of the progress that has been made over the last 50 years. So I don't know. I think as an optimist, I want to believe that the world is going to a better place and the US is going to a better place. But I'm not sure. I mean, look at Modi in India. I mean, India is becoming much more racist and much more focused on very narrow issues. What is happening in the Middle East, I think the Palestinian problem has not been resolved. Then we see, this US, African Americans. I mean, I wrote one piece for Jurist that I feel that the African Americans, these are crimes against humanity. What is happening in the US? So I want to be optimist, but I don't think that I'm foolish enough to say that we are going to something better. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I wish we are going to something better, but what might happen, I have no clue. I have really no clue.
And that's a perfectly fair assessment. Thank you, Ali. It's good to hear your voice. Elliot, I think we might be going to you as perhaps the voice of the future in some respects, but looking at all of this, from a European perspective, and not asking you to go back over 25 years, but looking at it really from the perspective of you being in Europe's backyard, even if no longer of Europe. Do you think that there is cause for optimism, or do you think that European politics and law are also going to take us in a problematic direction?
Well, having just lived through really two independence referenda. I mean, first there was the Scottish independence referendum. I can't remember when that was. I'm going to guess about 2015, or it could have been earlier than that, actually. And then Britain's referendum on separation from the European Union. I suppose I'm feeling a bit pessimistic at the moment, but it's probably a legacy of all of that. My general sense and what I was thinking about in response to your question was I probably have a general pessimism about the role of the West. If I'm thinking about international law and I'm looking back over the last 25 years, or really back to the end of the Second World War, you know, the international legal order was shaped by the West, obviously the United States in particular, the UK too, particularly at the end of the Second World War, and other Western powers. And I think that that has fragmented. I think we all know that it's a more multipolar world now. And there's nothing wrong with that in theory. The difficulty comes with the actors that are involved. And we've seen Russia and China as well pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable under international legal norms. And you know what, there are many, many examples, but one that comes to mind, particularly here in the UK, is the example of what's happening in Hong Kong. So obviously the UK has strong historic links to Hong Kong. So what happens there is often in the media here. I'm not sure about the extent to which it's discussed in other countries, but not so very long ago, there was the decision of the Chinese state to allow extradition, or an attempt to pass a law that would allow extradition of Hong Kong people to mainland China for trial. More recently, and I think this was only within the last month or two, there was a decision that you could only stand in the Hong Kong Parliament if you were a loyal citizen. You know, loyal to whom? I think we know what they mean by that. And I understand that from the 1st of August onwards, it's not going to be possible to leave Hong Kong, even if you have valid travel permits. And one of the things that's been discussed here is the British overseas passport, which many Hong Kong people who were born before independence from the UK, they're entitled to. So that document's no longer considered valid, and now the Chinese government's going to have the ability to stop people from leaving Hong Kong from the 1st of August. So that's a worry, and obviously the West has become heavily reliant, you know, too heavily reliant really, on goods from China and investment from China. And in Europe, we were talking about the European angle. In Europe, we have another problem, which is with Russia, and Germany and France in particular are very reliant on Russian gas. So the West has struggled for these reasons and others to deal with these actors and to assert itself against them. And also the West has been fragmented. And you know, you've been talking before about what's happened with the Trump administration. That's certainly not helped the case of the West. So that the US and Europe to an extent have drifted. I think that's maybe healing a bit under Biden. So that's been an issue. In Europe, of course, there has been a huge rift between the European Union and the UK, and that continues to have after effects. And the big topic of conversation at the moment here is the argument between the UK and Europe about COVID vaccines and the components for COVID vaccines. And a month or so ago, there was an attempt in the European Commission to block the export of these things into the UK, or at least that was certainly how it was reported here. And there was a very, very quick turnaround within the space of about 12 hours by the European Commission, and they stopped that. In the last couple of days, the European Commission has been saying that the UK has prevented the export of vaccines and vaccine components into the EU. And that's been rowed back on. The EU's acknowledged that hasn't happened, and the UK's not put any bans on. But you can see it's the bad blood between the two actors. So the actual what they're arguing about doesn't matter. The theme is that they're not getting on, and that's a problem if you have Western states not getting on. Meanwhile, Russia and China are doing their own thing and also getting along amongst themselves quite well. Apparently, they now plan to build a new moon base somewhere. So that seems to suggest that they are getting along and they're coordinating their efforts. And the UK and the West generally don't seem to have really much leverage to push back against this sort of thing just now. So I suppose it's difficult to say if I'm optimistic or pessimistic. I think if the West heals its divisions and can act more in a more concerted manner in the future, then I'm optimistic. And I hope that we're probably at the nadir just now and that things will get better, and maybe already are starting to get better. But it just depends on what politicians you have, what issues come up. Will the UK and the US still be arguing about vaccines? Will that deteriorate? Or will they, once everyone's vaccinated, will that dissolve and we'll focus on other things? I don't know. So that's a very broad sweeping answer, sorry, but I think, and it's not something I've written about, but it's probably what's in my mind is going forward is the worry about the role the West is going to have. And, it's not because I worry that the West and the countries that make up the West are going to lose influence so much as the fact that at the moment the West is the democratic center of gravity for the world, and other countries, the more powerful ones, they are not democratic, at least not at the moment.
Thank you, Elliot. I appreciate that perspective and your honesty in providing that. So I guess the question, as we sort of come up towards the end of our time here, and I don't want to carry us over beyond 5 p.m. too much, is so what do we do? What do we do individually? What do we do collectively? And I suppose in the context of this particular conversation, what can jurists do? What should we be doing, as an organization, as an institution, to address these issues more effectively as we go forward? Are there things that we should be covering more? Are there techniques of coverage that we should be using to make sure that people understand what is going on, perhaps in a better way than they do now? I mean, what would be your recommendations for us at this particular juncture? And I'll take any of the panelists on that one as we go around here. Any thoughts?
Could I jump in? That's Ben.
Absolutely, Ben. Please jump.
Okay. So with regards to what we can do, I would encourage, if anyone hasn't read it already, to read Hans Fallada's book, Every Man Dies Alone, about a couple in 1942 who rebelled against Hitler in Berlin by writing little cards and dropping them in public places when no one was looking. It's a true story, but the book is sort of a fiction based on this true story of this couple who are just ordinary working class Germans. Okay, and in the book there's a great line that the husband says, which is along the lines of, the main thing is you fight back. And I also want to think of the resistance people I met in Paris in the 17 years I lived there, where I asked them, how could you dare to go up against the Nazi war machine? You just had your carbon and you're out there in the middle of everywhere, and I'm expecting a high level analysis or something. And these folks said, well, it's really simple. It was not possible in France. That was the thing, that there is a certain level of rejection of a certain vision of autocracy, fascism, and all that and so people reacted. And so for me, that is the heart of it, is that sense of that is unacceptable in terms of these kinds of movements to retrograde spaces. And so then the question becomes what to do. Well, I can't emphasize enough the importance of jurists maintaining an ability as a place for voices to put out things that are not consistent with any retrograde political lines or whatever that are coming out there, that try to give an analysis in terms of rule of law, and that try to help people in the world see through this influence space that they're not crazy, that yes, it is legitimate for them to be upset about this thing, notwithstanding whatever discourse is being put forward by whoever the particular administration or others is in that country. And I think that creates what I like to call an online influence space, both on the page, but also through the network of people who read these things. I wanted to speak particularly to Hong Kong, because I almost lived there, and I visited back in '94. And I want to tell you that I spoke in China a couple of years ago at Changsha, and there were people from Hong Kong were there. And I just happened to mention in my very bad Chinese, the people in Hong Kong have been really good to me. And people from Hong Kong came up to me and said, thank you for saying nice things about us. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of saying nice things about those people in Hong Kong, of challenging this effort to repress their freedom, 50 years is 50 years. As to the European space, I think one of the things that's also important for us to do is to understand, if we take the long arc of the European space, is that Europe is an idea. And then the question is, what is an idea for what? And that's always the challenge for the 27 or 26, I guess now, countries there. For what? For what is Europe about? Yes, there is the gas deal. Yes, there is that. But let's take a look at Ukraine. What are we going to do about the aggression in I guess it's Eastern Ukraine? But are we just going to acquiesce? Are we going to, or as a group of countries ostensibly civilized, are we going to counteract that, push back that kind of retrograde activity in the European space? I did visit Sarajevo, after all the Balkan stuff recently. And one of the things that really struck me in Sarajevo is on the ground, they have what they call Sarajevo roses, which is places where mortars exploded and people died, and they paint them in red. And this is a memory of the war. And on the buildings, you can see the bullets in some of the older buildings and all that. Yet there I was with people who were Serbs, Muslims, Croats, who were working together to develop the Sarajevo arbitration space, and so they'd seen this as having been a horrendous mistake in their lives. And but they were working now to try to build it up again. And that kind of trying to build it together, dialogue, those kinds of things, I think are crucial. Otherwise, we leave the space of discussion to those who have very powerful megaphones to make us hate each other, quite honestly. So, if I could just sum it up, it's just keep publishing, keep thinking of new ways to publish things. I say you've got this long form thing that you're putting together now. Great. Jurist videos is another idea. This kind of a podcast interview video with people might be another way to do it. And to build ties with various actors in the world, basically it's seeking affinity, if I could say it like that, with others who want to create what I call free spaces, not false spaces, but free spaces. Because in those free spaces, what we do, if we dare to say something, I like to say to people, if you succumb to the fear, you're not free. And that is your test all the time. If you hesitate to write something, you're not free. And so it's better to think of yourself as having a duty to be free and to say the things that you think, which may be right, may be wrong, whatever, but they are the space of dialogue that helps us all progress. I'll throw that out there.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. I want to get a couple of our other panelists on this before we wrap up here. Anybody else want to go on this particular subject? What is to be done? What can jurists do? Any suggestions or other comments that anyone would like to add from the panel?
Hey, Bernard, I really want to appreciate what you have done in the last 25 years. I think Jurist has so much influence. The people who read Jurist all over the world, I think they are people. So the audience Jurist is very supportive. And what you have done is absolutely a contribution to the world, dialogue. And I think I would suggest that you maybe recruit more diverse voices over the world who can contribute to jurist commentary. Of course, we'll be there and we will write for you, but of course we need more people and from diverse corners of the world so that the depth of jurist can be achieved. And so I think that's my small suggestion, that recruit more people. And they're very, very, interesting people in universities across the world who would like to write for jurist and deepen the dialogue.
And we will go after them, Ali. I can promise you that. Any other comments or suggestions from our panelists here before we go on? All right. All right. Good. Well, I thank you all for all of that. So I hope as I get to the 5 o'clock hour and we wrap this up, I hope that this has been an interesting discussion for everybody as we look back on 25 years and really celebrate the efforts of all of our panelists and so many others. Who have contributed to Jurist so much over the years. We would not be here. This institution, would not exist without the contributions of content and ideas and ideals that they have all made. And they, being here with us today, stand for, at this point, hundreds of others who have made similar contributions over the years to Jurist. And so really, this is intended as much as a celebration of them as anything else today. So my deep thanks to all of our panelists, all of our commentary contributors over the years who have really filled our pages with good and interesting ideas, our virtual pages anyway, with good and interesting ideas. And I'm sure that there'll be many more good ideas to come. Before I finally wrap this up, I want to thank the professional staff of Jurist for helping to put this event together this afternoon, especially our executive director, Megan McKee, who made sure that all the ducks lined up and all the invitations went out and all of this. We will, of course, be recording this. We have recorded this and we will be posting it online. So her good labors and all the good labors of everybody else involved will come to fruition and can be enjoyed by others in weeks and years to come. And at the very end, I would like to thank the literal, at this point, generations of Jurist staffers, some of whom I see on the screen actually from way back. And although we won't have time perhaps to chat in this environment, I do so appreciate your presence here this afternoon. It's really the students who have made this work over the years because you provided the power for so much of this. And I was so glad at the outset that Kevin, for instance, made reference to your contributions. And we all are appreciative of this, and we all realize how much you have done to make all of this work. And I think now there will be new generations of Jurist staffers coming forward, new generations of law students going forward, as we do more and more things on a broader and broader field. And I can't help but recognize and think about the fact today that we are very far afield now. Even as we speak, we have law students in Myanmar who are working with us, covering that situation on the ground. That is a new model for what we can do going forward. And again, just to be there is important to create that kind of free space that Ben talks about. Is so critical, and I think we can do some of that by really leveraging the presence of law students on the ground who know Jurist, who want to work with Jurist, and can help everybody understand what is happening in the world, and in this case to themselves as well as to all of us. So that is all for tonight. I want to thank all of our panelists. David Crane, Elliot Winter, Marjorie Cohn, Kevin Govern, Ben Davis, and Ali Khan. It has been a pleasure to see you all again, or in a couple of instances to actually see you for the first time, which is really quite remarkable to say after all these years. But it has been great doing this. I want to thank everybody for having come to this event this afternoon. And that is all from me. So we will leave you to enjoy your evening, and goodbye from Jurist. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.